Ladies and gentlemen, today we discuss a moment that captured the world's attention. In a hall filled with diplomats, journalists, and scholars, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke a single word that echoed far beyond the walls of the conference. That one word carried the weight of history, the pride of sovereignty, and the spirit of a rising nation. It was not just a word, it was a declaration, a reminder that India is not to be lectured, pressured, or undermined. It was a signal to America and the world that India will speak its own truth, pursue its own path, and stand tall among the great powers of the century. That word left the audience silent, thoughtful, and in awe, because sometimes one word can change the entire tone of global politics. Though the word was spoken in America, its message traveled far beyond. It was not just aimed at Washington, but at every capital across the globe. The message was clear. India cannot be ignored, dictated to, or underestimated. The stunned reaction proved that even the most powerful nations now recognize India's assertive place in global politics. In diplomacy, every phrase is carefully measured, every sentence weighed for its impact. But what Dr. Jaishankar achieved with just one word was extraordinary. That word carried a force that entire speeches sometimes fail to deliver. It was a reminder that true power lies not in the abundance of words, but in the sharpness of meaning. By choosing a single word, he stripped away ambiguity and left no room for misinterpretation. It was a masterstroke that blended clarity with authority, forcing everyone in the room to pause and reflect. This simplicity was, in fact, his strength, because when a single word can silence a hall of powerful leaders, it speaks volumes about the confidence and determination of the speaker. It demonstrated that leadership is not about overwhelming others with endless arguments, but about striking precisely at the heart of the matter with unmatched precision. The audience in America, known for its debates, discussions, and long-winded rhetoric, found themselves stunned how a single, unshaken word could carry the weight of a nation's stance more effectively than any elaborate justification could ever hope to. That one word was not chosen by accident. It was a deliberate act of assertion. In the world of international relations, words are not just expressions. They are signals of intent, reflections of identity, and declarations of position. Jaishankar's choice made it crystal clear that India is not a nation that waits for approval from others before making decisions. It was a direct message that India's foreign policy is shaped by its own vision, its own priorities, and its own understanding of national interests. For too long, some powers expected India to follow their line, to adjust its choices based on Western preferences, or to be swayed by pressure tactics. But this one word shattered that expectation. It reminded America and the wider world that India's sovereignty is not negotiable, that its independence of thought is not up for compromise. The brilliance of Jaishankar's delivery was that he didn't need to raise his voice or resort to confrontation. The word itself carried the weight of centuries of struggle for freedom, the legacy of self-reliance, and the determination of a rising power that will not be dictated to. It was, in every sense, a verbal shield of sovereignty that drew an invisible boundary around India's dignity and pride, reminding everyone present that respect is the first condition of engagement with New Delhi. The most striking part of that moment was not just the word itself, but the atmosphere it created in the room. In America, audiences are often quick to respond, with applause, with murmurs, with counterpoints. But this time, there was silence. A silence so heavy that it spoke louder than any words could. The stunned reaction of the American officials, analysts, and media present revealed something significant. They were not prepared for such a direct and uncompromising expression of India's confidence. For decades, the United States had grown accustomed to nations either aligning with its views or carefully softening their disagreements. Yet here was India, through Jaishankar, delivering a message so sharp and undeniable that it left no space for debate. The silence in the hall was not just about shock. It was also about recognition. Recognition that India's voice could not be brushed aside, that this was not the language of a follower, but of an equal. It unsettled some, impressed others, and reminded everyone that the geopolitical stage had shifted. In that quiet reaction, you could sense the recalibration happening in real time. America realizing that India was no longer simply reacting to the moves of others, but setting its own terms in the dialogue of global power. Diplomacy has often been viewed as the art of carefully chosen pleasantries, of finding middle ground, and of using long speeches filled with polite ambiguity. But what Jaishankar did in that moment turned the traditional image of diplomacy on its head. With just one word, he showed that diplomacy is not only about compromise, it can also be about clarity. He redefined the very approach to global dialogue by proving that being direct does not mean being disrespectful, and that firmness does not have to come with hostility. His choice of language displayed the evolution of Indian diplomacy. No longer shy, no longer seeking validation, but instead grounded, confident, and unapologetically assertive. This shift is especially significant because it contrasts with the way many nations, particularly smaller or developing ones, often tread carefully around great powers like the United States. Instead of softening India's stance to appease, Jaishankar gave the world an example of how strength can be conveyed in brevity. He showed that diplomacy in the 21st century requires more than just polite dialogue. It demands authenticity and the courage to speak the truth without hesitation. His style created a new benchmark, one where words are not wasted, but wielded like instruments of precision. Sharp enough to be felt, yet dignified enough to command respect. That one word did not just represent a diplomatic stance. It symbolized the emergence of a new era where India's voice is not only heard, but respected across the world. For years, India's contributions were often underestimated or seen through the lens of larger powers. But Jaishankar's statement was a declaration that those days are over. India now speaks as a nation that has the economic strength, the strategic influence, and the moral credibility to shape the global conversation. This rising voice is not confined to regional matters. It extends to global challenges like climate change, technology, security, and trade. When Jaishankar spoke, he was not simply representing India's present. He was projecting India's future as a nation that sets its own course while influencing the direction of the world. The confidence behind that single word reflected decades of growth, reforms, and determination that have transformed India from a developing country seeking recognition into a pivotal power demanding partnership on equal terms. It was a reminder that India is not a silent observer in the halls of global decision-making anymore. It is a participant whose voice carries weight and whose words can redefine the narrative. Although the word was spoken on American soil, its impact traveled far beyond the immediate audience. It was not a statement aimed solely at Washington, but a carefully crafted signal to every global capital, from London to Moscow, from Beijing to Tokyo. What Jaishankar conveyed was that India is no longer a country to be nudged into compliance or swayed by subtle pressures. It is a nation that charts its own path and expects others to engage with it on equal footing. That word carried an undertone of universality, reminding the international community that India's choices are guided by principles, not by fear or favor. It told smaller nations that independence of thought is possible, even in a world dominated by superpowers, and it told larger powers that India will neither be sidelined nor spoken for. By delivering such a message in a concise yet powerful way, Jaishankar elevated India's global profile, transforming what could have been a routine diplomatic exchange into a defining moment that reverberated through headlines, policy circles, and diplomatic briefings worldwide. And so, what began as a simple exchange turned into a historic reminder that sometimes one word can carry the weight of a nation's pride, history, and vision for the future. Dr. Jaishankar's statement was not just an answer to a question. It was a declaration of India's identity, its sovereignty, and its rightful place among the world's great powers. It stunned America because it came with clarity, confidence, and conviction, showing that India does not need to shout to be heard. From that moment, it became clear to all who listen that India is not only participating in global dialogue, it is shaping it.